Kerry tells Congress to hold off on new Iran sanctions for now. Washington CNN. He doesn't trust Iran, vows it won't get nuclear weapons, and believes past rhetoric by its leaders threatening annihilation of Israel is unacceptable and kind of insane. So why is Secretary of State John Kerry so adamant about getting time to try to negotiate an agreement that would further curb Iran's nuclear ambitions in exchange for lifting crippling economic sanctions? The former senator spent two and a half hours at the House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing on Tuesday defending the international negotiations last month that brought an interim deal with Iran intended to lead to a comprehensive agreement after 6 months. Facing skeptical legislators from both parties, Kerry tried to assure them that he shares their mistrust of Iran while asking that they halt the drive for new sanctions for now to give negotiations, which also involve the other permanent members of the UN Security Council and Germany, a chance to succeed. He bristled when yet another GOP legislator Rep. Jeff Duncan of South Carolina described the U.S. position as giving Iran the benefit of the doubt by not requiring the dismantling of all centrifuges needed to enrich uranium for nuclear weapons. I sat here and said we're skeptical. I sat here and said they've got to prove it, Kerry responded, adding there's no benefit of any doubt here. His takeaway message borrowed from former President Ronald Reagan's trust but verify guideline for a weapon deal with the Soviet Union, but Kerry modified it to reflect the lack of trust in Tehran's intentions. Test and verify, he said respectfully, in describing restrictions on Iran's program in the interim agreement, as well as the necessary monitoring and testing for a final agreement acceptable to President Barack Obama that would ensure Iran would be unable to develop nukes. A bipartisan group of senators is working on new sanctions legislation, and the House may consider a similar measure, prompted by concern that the interim agreement eased some sanctions without achieving the goal of ridding Iran of its centrifuges and other technology needed to build a nuclear bomb. However, the interim deal reached last month in Geneva prohibits new sanctions, and Kerry argued Tuesday that such a step was unnecessary at this point. They know that if they fail, sanctions will be increased, Kerry said of Iran. We've said it 100 times, and you all have said it 100 times, and they know you're yelling to go do it, but you don't need to do it. It is actually gratuitous in the context of this situation, because you can do it in a week if you need to. When we say this ain't working, we need your help, and believe me, we'll be prepared to do that. After Kerry's remarks Tuesday, the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee said the panel would hold off on considering new sanctions legislation for now. The statement by Democratic Son Tim Johnson of South Dakota left open the possibility of Senate leaders taking up the bill without having it go through the committee. Earlier, Kerry declared that Iran will not acquire a nuclear weapon, calling the stance and centerpiece of President Barack Obama's foreign policy. The interim agreement is some $7 billion in economic sanctions in return for limiting aspects of Iran's nuclear program, Kerry told the committee. Israel opposed that deal because it allows Iran, a longtime enemy of the Jewish state, to continue enriching uranium needed to develop nuclear weapons. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made clear that Israel would attack Iran's nuclear facilities if it felt threatened, and the negotiations are considered an effort to avoid a possible military confrontation in the volatile Middle East. In Congress, legislators from both parties agree that tougher measures are needed. We are facing an immoral and very dangerous regime in Iran, one nearing a nuclear weapon, rep at Royce and House Foreign Affairs Committee's Republican chairman said at Tuesday's hearing. I am hard-pressed to understand why we'd be letting up sanctions pressure at the very time its economy is on the ropes without getting an agreement which stops its centrifuges from spinning. Others used more graphic language, with Gov. Rep. Mo Brooks of Alabama comparing Iran's threat against Israel to Nazi Germany. What can you say to Israel and the rest of our allies in the Middle East to convince them that America is still a reliable ally, that America will enforce agreements with Iran or else, and that America is not ignoring history and repeating the 1930s Neville Chamberlain-like pattern of appeasement and retreat that helped trigger World War II and the death of tens of millions of people around the world? Brooks asked. Kerry responded by condemning in the strongest language possible those expressions of hate and of, sheer and utter insanity, almost asking for a country to be wiped off the face of the map. That language is the most abhorrent kind of language you can find in any disclosure of public life, he said. It has no place in a reasonable world. It's unacceptable, and we should never hear that kind of language again. Iranian officials have long said the country's nuclear intentions were peaceful. They also warned any new sanctions would scuttle the interim agreement, noting that language in the document specifies no new ones can occur. Obama said over the weekend that he would accept a peaceful nuclear program in Iran, including modest uranium enrichment. However, Royce said the key issue is whether an eventual final agreement negotiated on the world stage with Iran would permit it to manufacture nuclear fuel. Unfortunately, the interim agreement raises some questions about this. He said, "My concern is that we may have bargained away our fundamental position, which is enshrined in 6 UN Security Council resolutions, and that fundamental agreement is that Iran should not be enriching and reprocessing. We may bargain that away for a false confidence that we can effectively check Iran's misuse of the nuclear weapons technologies." GOP rep Matt Salmon of Arizona said the Iranians can get all the nuclear material they need for power by purchasing it from other countries, adding that they don't need to enrich it themselves. Kerry stopped short of declaring a final agreement with Iran would prevent any uranium enrichment capability for Tehran, saying such details must be worked out. He noted that the interim agreement reached last month requires full consensus on such matters. To legislators calling for more sanctions, Kerry said economic strictures alone had failed to prevent Iran from expanding its centrifuges in recent years as it made progress toward developing a nuclear weapon. The issue here is what are we going to do about it so we don't have a sudden breakout, he said, adding that the interim agreement is a step toward that. In order to weaponize, you have to have highly enriched uranium. Under the agreement, they can have highly enriched uranium. Royce, though, noted that Iran has a history of deceiving the international community about its nuclear program and is pursuing a ballistic missile program in violation of UN Security Council resolutions, adding that it simply can't be trusted with enrichment technology because verification of efforts can never be foolproof. 2 French soldiers killed in Central African Republic unrest. Bangui, Central African Republic, CNN. 2 French soldiers sent to the Central African Republic as part of an international peacekeeping mission have been killed, the French presidency said Tuesday. The 2 soldiers, both paratroopers in their early 20s, were killed in combat in the capital, Bangui on Monday night. A statement from the Elysee Palace said, "They lost their lives to save others," it said. French President François Hollande learned of the soldier's death with great sadness, the statement said. He also reiterated his full confidence in the French forces deployed alongside African forces to restore security in the Central African Republic, protect civilian populations, and ensure access to humanitarian aid. Hollande arrived in the Central African Republic Tuesday evening, local time. Public service broadcaster Radio France reported. After attending the official memorial service for the late South African President Nelson Mandela in Johannesburg, France, the former colonial power in the Central African Republic, has deployed 1,600 personnel there to support African Union troops. After a vote last week in the UN Security Council authorizing military intervention. Hollande's visit, during which he was expected to meet with troops, pay his respects before the soldiers' caskets, and speak with local leaders, may be intended to help shore up public support back home. Surveys indicate about half the French public backed the mission. Hollande did not need parliamentary approval to send troops to the Central African Republic, but the move has wide support from lawmakers. Christian Muslim militias fight. Violence has raged in the Central African Republic since a coalition of rebels deposed President Francois Bozize in March, the latest in a series of coups since the nation gained independence. Bozize fled the country after his ouster. Christian vigilante groups have formed to battle Seleka, the predominantly Muslim coalition behind the president's removal. More than 415,000 people, nearly 10% of the population, have been eternally displaced by the fighting, according to the United Nations, and 68,000 more have fled to neighboring countries. French forces began their operations in the country east of Cameroon and north of the Democratic Republic of the Congo on Friday, a day after the UN resolution authorizing their deployment was approved. France is determined to act to restore basic security in the Central African Republic in order to halt the spiral of abuses and sectarian drift, allow the return of humanitarian workers and basic state structures, Defense Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian said. A deadline was set by the African-led peacekeeping force backed by the French for the warring militias to disarm by midday Monday. But a CNN team traveling with a UN convoy back to Bangui from the town of Basanga, about 185 miles north of the capital, said Salaka roadblocks were still in evidence on the main road. The team also saw Christian anti-Balaka militiamen along the road. Smoke could be seen rising a short distance off the road a number of times from what looked like burning villages. As the convoy neared its destination, automatic weapons fire was directed at the main French checkpoint leading into Bangui, where there's a build-up of French forces, calling for calm and peace. The Pentagon said Monday that American military aircraft would help the peacekeeping efforts by flying African and European peacekeepers to the Central African Republic from Burundi. In a statement, President Barack Obama appealed for the country's citizens to reject violence and urged the transitional government to join respected leaders in Muslim and Christian communities in calling for calm and peace. Individuals who are engaging in violence must be held accountable in accordance with the law. Meanwhile, forces from other African countries and friends work to restore security. The United States will support their effort to protect civilians, Obama said. The chief prosecutor for the International Criminal Court, Fatou Bensouda, said the deteriorating security situation over the past few days had contributed to the escalation of unlawful killings, sexual violence, recruitment of child soldiers, and other grave crimes across the country. She urged all parties in the conflict to stop attacking civilians and committing crimes or risk being investigated and prosecuted. A spike in fighting in Bangui since Thursday has claimed at least 400 lives, according to the official count. Rights group Amnesty International said in a statement Monday. However, the group estimates as many as 1,000 people may have been killed, with many hastily buried before they could be accounted for. The true number of the deaths may never be known, it said. An estimated 60,000 have been displaced within Bangui, Amnesty International added, as it appealed for urgent steps to protect civilians in vulnerable areas. Doctors Without Borders, or Medicines Sans Frontières, said its staff had witnessed summary killings inside one hospital in Bangui on Thursday. It called for all sides to respect civilians and medical facilities in Bangui and across the country. Basanga camps, as well as carrying out patrols in Bangui. French forces have been sent to Bensagawa, where more than 40,000 of those displaced by fighting have sought refuge in camps. The French intend to make Bensagawa safe and to push out to the even more insecure bush past the city limits, where 100,000 people have been hiding for the past 6 months in fear for their lives. An official from FOMAC, the multinational force for Central Africa, said the Seleka militia would no longer be allowed to run the country as local administrators, and instead police will begin to do that. Also, members of the militia group will be restricted to their camps, and when they venture out, they will be forced to leave their weapons behind. This rule also applies to the Christian anti-Balaka militia, which includes vigilante groups. If any of the groups defy this order, said the official, they will be forcefully disarmed. But the commander of the Seleka militia, called Saha Zabadi, told the CNN team in Bosangoa that his force has no intention of going anywhere. We are this country's government. Leave power. Maybe if we are dead, he said definitely. He said definitely. Elian Gonzalez slams U.S. embargo against Cuba. Quito at Ecuador CNN. One name stands out on the guest list of thousands of youth at a conference in Ecuador this week. Elian Gonzalez, 14 years after he made headlines as the subject of a bitter international custody battle, Gonzalez spoke to CNN on Tuesday. It's his first trip abroad since the U.S. government removed him at gunpoint from his relative's home in Miami, and after a legal battle, sent him back to Cuba to live with his father. Gonzalez, who turned 20 last week, was just 6 years old when he was found clinging to an inner tube after the tiny boat he has traveling in from Cuba sank on the way to the United States. Gonzalez's mother and 9 other people in the boat drowned. He had harsh words for the United States on Tuesday as he recalled his mother's daily journey. Just like her, many others have died attempting to go to the United States, but it's the U.S. government's fault. Their unjust embargo provokes an internal and critical economic situation in Cuba, Gonzalez said. But despite that, Cuba, even with all its problems, has progressed over the years. The progress we've made is all thanks to Cuba's courage, our dignity, our continued fight for a more just model. Gonzalez is in Quito, Ecuador, for the World Festival of Youth and Students, a left-wing conference attracting more than 10,000 people from all over the world to discuss global struggles against imperialism. He told CNN in Espanol that he has been asked to speak at the conference, but isn't quite sure what his topic will be. My topic could range anywhere from the lifting of the unjust blockade on Cuba to the freedom of the Cuban Five. The main reason we're here is because we want a revolutionary progressive movement that leads to socialism, he said. The 5 Cubans imprisoned in the United States are convicted on charges of espionage, but are considered heroes in Cuba because many believe they pretended acts of terrorism on the island. After his rescue in 1999, Gonzalez was placed with relatives in Miami who wanted to keep him in the United States, but Gonzalez's father, John Miguel, fought to bring him back to Cuba. Then Cuban leader Fidel Castro led massive protests in Cuba demanding Gonzalez's return. The case of the telegenic boy became a flashpoint between supporters and opponents of Castro's revolution.